Good afternoon, everyone. We are ready to report out on our Education, Business and Administration Subcommittee. Who is going to start down there? Go ahead, Patrick.
I will start with page 1, the Board of Public Works. This is annual narrative asking for financial and admissions data. Agency concurs, first house adopted.
Okay,
On page 2, for the Executive Department of the Governor, the DLS recommendation was concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
I want to put their microphones on, please. Okay, we're good.
On page 3, you'll see Historic St. Mary City Commission. There was funds restricted for a performance audit to be turned in. The agency concurred, the House adopted. This report was turned in yesterday, so you will want to reject the House action.
Reject.
Okay.
On page 5 is the Maryland Stadium Authority. This is language that restricts $17 million for the Racing and Community Development Financing Fund. Agency concurred in part. First house adopted. Concur with the House.
Okay,
On page 7, for the Canal Place Preservation and Development Authority, the DLS recommendation was concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
okay,
You go to the page on page 9, you see there was some narrative that was added by the House. What this does is it requires the Treasurer's Office to collect the ratings reports before bond sales. There is on the yellow sheet, page number 1, there is a slight modification to this to add that this would be also non-state debt would be gathered in this process as well.
To modify the House action and adopt the color page.
okay. We have a little bit of technological problems here. We can't have all the mics on at the same time. So they're gonna try and keep up with us. But we may just have to have one person making the motions. We'll work on that. We're okay for right now. Okay,
Okay, on page 10, Department of Information Technology, the first reduction is $2.2 million for a project. There's $50 million in special funds that can be used. So the recommendation here is to reduce the funds and use the special funds instead. Agency concurred, first house adopted.
Concur with the House.
Second item is a similar recommendation to reduce funding for a project that doesn't need the funds. Agency concurred, first house adopted.
Concur with the House.
Third item is some narrative about the new financial management information system. Is a large new system. We often have quarterly reporting for these. Agency concurs, first house adopted.
Concur with the House.
And then on page 11, the final recommendation for information technology is to get some MFR indicators for their services to see if they're doing providing services at a good price, and agency concurred, first house adopted.
Concur with the House.
Page 13 has the Department of General Services. The first recommendation is some MFR indicators for some new employee training programs that they have. Agency concurred, first house adopted.
Concur with the House.
Number 2 is a state center, a status report for that project. Agency concurred, first house adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 15. On page 15 in the Maryland Department of Labor, the first item is DLS recommended standard language related to repeat audit findings, and the agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 16, DLS recommended language restricting funding pending a report on an information technology project. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 17, this is narrative that the House added related to studying a 4-day work week program. There is a color page that would modify the House narrative slightly, adding a bit on the feasibility of moving state workers to a 36-hour work week schedule as well.
Modify the House action and adopt the color page.
Okay. For the MSD headquarters, we're on page 18. The first action is funds restricted for an agency report to resolve audit findings. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
At the bottom of page 18, number 2, this is the DLS recommendation was a report on accounting practices. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 19, action number 3, DLS recommended a report on state education agency federal stimulus funds. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 20, item number 4, DLS recommended a report on the Maryland Leads program. The agency disagreed, but the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 21, item number 5, DLS recommended a report on virtual learning. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Then moving to page 23, there was an additional first House action for a report on state teacher mobility compacts that House adopted.
Concur with the House.
And then on page 3.
I would just like to say that the House needs to really appreciate how nice we are.
I know, right? A lot of concurring going on here.
Moving to the color page packet on page 3, this is additional language that is for report. It's for a letter so that MSD will submit reports and it withholds funds until all reports are submitted and the submission of a letter.
Concur.
Okay, moving to page 25. This is item number 1. This is language that withholds funds for a report on free and reduced price meal enrollment. The agency disagreed, the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Then moving to page 26. This is item number 2. DLS recommended a report on non-public placement program. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Also on page 26, item 3, DLS recommended a status update on the autism waiver program. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Then on page 27, item 4, DLS recommended a status update on the Pathways and Technology Early College High School program. Agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur. The House.
On the bottom of page 28, item number 5, DLS recommended a status report on the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Then moving to page 30, there was an additional first House action striking language from the general fund appropriation, deleting those funds for the Maryland Educators Shortage Act, and the House adopted.
Concur.
Moving to page 31, this is the MSDE funding for educational organizations. The first item is a DLS recommended a report from Maryland School for the Blind on enrollment and managing for results measures. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Also on page 31, item 2 is annual language modifying the distribution of funding for the aid to non-public schools program. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Moving to page 32, item number 3 is annual language requiring schools that participate in the aid to non-public schools program to submit a student handbook. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Item number 4 on page 32 is annual language to ensure compliance with Title 20 Subtitle 6 of the state government article. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Moving to page 34, item number 5, DLS recommended a report on ARPA EN's funding. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
And then on the bottom of page 34, item number 6, this is annual language on the BOOST program. This goes through page 40.
We're going to refer this to the full committee.
All right, then moving to page 41. This is the Interagency Commission on School Construction. Item number 1, DLS recommended a status update on Chapter 32 of 2022. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Okay. On the next page, 42, this begins the early childhood programs under MSDE. The first action is narrative recommended by DLS that would request reports on childcare stabilization grant allocations that were supported with American Rescue Plans. And MSDE concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Item 2 on that page recommends a $10 million general fund reduction from the Child Care Scholarship Program to be, and then item 3 on the next page would add language authorizing a federal fund amendment to replace those funds with Child Care and Development Block Grant Award or supplemental awards. MSD disagreed with these 2 actions. The House adopted both.
Concur with the House.
Item 4 on page 43 recommends narrative requesting annual quarterly reports on the Child Care Scholarship Program's enrollment and spending. MSD concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 44, item 5 recommends narrative requesting reports or requesting that MSD include Child Care Scholarship customer service and application processing times with its annual performance measures. MSD concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Then on page 46, the House adopted an additional action. This is narrative requesting a report on childcare funding that could be used on provider business practices.
Concur with the House.
Then on page 47 for the Maryland State Library Agency, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
Moving to page 48, the first item, DLS recommended us, this is for the Accountability and Implementation Board. DLS recommended a status update on expenditures, personnel, and managing for results measures. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
And then on page 49, there was an additional first House action that they adopted to delete funds for a consultant study to reflect delays in the submission date.
Reject.
Thank you. On page 50, we have Morgan State University. Item number 1 is standard language, restricted funds pending report on the status of the corrective actions for the latest audit report.
Concur with the House.
Item 2 is on page 51. It was requesting a report on the National Center for the Elimination of Educational Disparities. DLS concurred, the agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 52, we have St. Mary's College of Maryland. The action is concur with governor's allowance. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
And this is on page 53. This is for the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 54 for University System of Maryland, it's concur with the governor allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 55 for University of Maryland, Baltimore, the recommendation is see the overview for system-wide recommendations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 56 for University of Maryland College Park, the recommendation was to see the overview for system-wide recommendations. The agency concurred and the House adopted. However, I do have a color page for your consideration, color page number 4. And this would ask College Park to report on undergraduate admissions process.
Move to adopt with the color page.
Page 4. Okay, moving back into your decision document, page 57 for Towson University. This is also to see the USM overview for system-wide recommendations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 58. On page 58, we have University of Maryland Eastern Shore. The recommendation is to see the University System of Maryland overview for system-wide recommendations. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
I have a color page for your consideration. It's number 5, page 5. It's requesting committee narrative for the University of Maryland Global Campus Funding, a report. It's in the color page document, page 5.
Move to adopt the color page.
Okay, on page 59 for Frostburg State University. This is also to see the USM overview for system-wide recommendations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 60 for MHEC, our first recommendation is an annual request for institutional aid by EFC. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
The second recommendation is another annual request for a report on progress towards the 55% completion goal. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 61, the third recommendation is a report for on non-traditional pathways. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Moving to page 63. The House added narrative requesting a report on advising system and wraparound services.
Concur with the House.
On page 64, we have the aid to community colleges. The recommendation was to submit a report on community college enrollment decline and use of funding. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 65, we have MHEC student financial assistance. Item number 1 is requesting a report on the impact of credit completion requirement on financial aid awards. The agency concurred in part, the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Item number 2 is the Next Generation Scholars Post-Secondary Outcomes Report. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
We have additional items on page 67 from the House. The first one is a report on fully funding guaranteed access and educational assistance grants.
Concur with the House.
The second is to add budget language, restricting funds, reducing funds to for the police officer scholarship program, contingent on the enactment of House Bill 982.
Concur with the House.
On page 68, we have the state support for higher education institutions. Item 1 and 2 are related to BCCC. Item 1 restricts funding pending a report on enrollment in Merit Scholars Program.
Concur with the House.
Item number 2 also restricts funds pending a report on task 6 of the realignment. And the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Item number 3 is a technical amendment related to Morgan. I recommend adopting to reflect your earlier actions.
Concur.
On page 70, item 4 is the annual narrative requesting a report on instructional faculty workload. The agencies concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 72, the House added narrative requesting report on programs to foster growth in the cannabis industry.
Concur with the House.
Okay, the House also added language restricting funds from all higher education segments until a report is submitted on improving the academic approval process.
Concur.
On page 75, we have Baltimore City Community College. These 2 items are technical and I recommend adopting them to reflect the previous actions you just took.
Concur.
On page 77, this is Maryland School for the Deaf. DLS recommending concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
Then on page 78, this is the Maryland African American Museum Corporation. The DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
On page 79 for the Department of Commerce, DLS recommended language requiring notification to the Legislative Policy Committee before the disbursement of funds for a Sunny Day Award. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
I also have a color page on the Department of Commerce for your consideration. It's page 6, the back of the color page packet. This would be narrative requesting a report on the historic ships in Baltimore and the impact on tourism.
Move to adopt the color page.
Moving back to the packet on page 80, this is for the Maryland Economic Development Corporation or MEDCO. This is a non-budgeted agency. The House adopted.
Move to concur.
And finally, on page 81 for the Maryland Technology Development Corporation or TEDCO, DLS recommended making funding for the Equitech Growth Fund contingent on legislation establishing the program. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur with the House.
And then I wanted to just quickly return to the first page of the color packet, to just review the action from the State Treasurer's Office. Just to make sure that there was a minor change in the language there under the bond sale issuance.
Move to adopt.
I think that's it. I just do, and I don't know if anybody here can answer this question. For the Maryland Public Television, they had requested money for historical films that they wanted to do. And I'm just trying to find out how much money was put in for that. It was in here and we adopted it, but it didn't say how much. Curious,
I'm not sure.
no idea. I'll find out.
So, yes, Chair, that's, an analyst who's in another, decision meeting. So,
Okay.
but I will definitely get that information to
Okay.
you.
Appreciate it. All right, I think that does it. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Tell me again, the money was deducted from a Maryland Public Television?
No, we wanted to, the governor put some money in. They had asked, I don't
That's
think he
what I
put
was-
everything
that's
in.
the
He
question.
put some money in. I'm just trying to find out how much he put in for these
Very
historical
good.
films they're going to do.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Okay. Thank you all.